I recently moved out. My parents stay in California. I finished high school there and took a job in LA. I had a senior here who helped me find a small apartment perfect for me. I've been self-dependent from a very young age, so moving out wasn't that scary for me. The apartment was already furnished enough, the only thing I needed was a new mattress. One of my colleagues at work told me there's a local Ikea store 2 blocks away from our workplace. So one evening I decided to head there after work. It was a warm summer night, and even though I wanted to leave early, I couldn't. At around 8:30, I finally reached the Ikea store. A vast range of different types of furniture stood all around me. The store closes at 9, so I hurried to the bed X section. I was looking for a comfy sleeping mattress. There was one guy at the sales counter located near the entrance. The store was mostly empty. I stood near the mattress collection and started to go through the price tags looking for affordable prices. I looked all around, expecting a sales guy to help me out, but I didn't see anyone. I don't know how long I was checking out the mattresses. My concentration broke, hearing a voice behind me. "Are you looking for anything particular, ma'am?" I turned back immediately and saw an average height, bony dude standing behind me wearing an employee uniform. His eyes were creepy. It wasn't just wide, but the eyeballs were almost bulging out of their eye sockets. I replied awkwardly, "I would like this one." He smiled creepily and said, "We do have some more collections at the back, and those will come at a good discount too. If you want, I can show you." I didn't think it was any harm to check some more options out, so I said, "Sure, show me." The man started to walk toward the end of the store, and I followed him there. As soon as we reached the left corner of the store, I realized maybe this was a bad idea. This particular area was quite far away from the entrance and dark too. I could see wrapped furniture scattered all over the place. The man pointed to a pile of mattresses put up against the wall and said, "Why don't you check those? Hope you find what you're looking for," and smiled even bigger this time. I nervously walked toward the pile and started to go through the price tags. I could tell from my peripheral vision that the man kept watching my every single move like a creep. I turned back to him and said, "I think I'm going to go for the first one." The man was standing right in front of the way leading to the entrance. My heartbeat got faster because I knew he was blocking my way, and there was no security cameras nearby. The man replied, "There's some more in the basement too. If you come with me, I can get you a good deal." That moment I decided to man up and confront him for his creepy behavior. I said, "No thanks. I made up my mind. Let's go to the front section, shall we?" Suddenly, the man covered his face with his hands and started to sob like a child. I definitely wasn't expecting this to happen, and I said, what happened?" He looked at me, and I saw his tearful, wide eyes. There was a pain in his face, yet I couldn't help but feel awkward with his behavior. The man said, please stop me." I replied, "Stop from what? Are you all right?" He looked at his hands mysteriously and then looked at me again. I said, "Listen, if you're feeling sick, we can call for the paramedics. Let me ask the man at the counter." I started to walk past him to reach out for help, and that's when he grabbed my hand tightly and said, "You have to stop me before I kill again. I don't want to do this anymore." The ground beneath my feet started to shiver. What? What are you? Oh my God. I tried to ask for help, but before I could do so, a huge punch hit my face, knocking me out in a second. When I woke from my slumber, I noticed myself tied to a chair. I slowly opened my eyes and looked around. My left eye was throbbing with pain. I realized the psycho guy had abducted me. "Help me! Somebody! Please help me! I'm here!" I screamed as loud as I could. Suddenly, I heard a muffled gagging sound coming from behind me. I was tied tight, so it was impossible to move a muscle. I realized that there was someone with me in this room. I pushed myself to the back and accidentally fell on the floor. I hit my head, but what I saw terrified me like hell. There was a man tied to another chair. He was wearing a pair of jeans and had bruises all over his face. Someone beat him up brutally. The man said in a painful, sobbing voice, "He stole my uniform. Call the cops," and then passed out. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and I realized we were in a basement area. I screamed, "Is someone here? Please help us." But then I heard the same sobbing sound. "I told you to stop me. Why didn't you?" The man wearing the Ikea uniform came in front of me. I realized this guy is an imposter. He not only abducted me, but also beat the shit out of an actual salesman of the Ikea unit. "You crazy psycho. Don't think you're gonna get away with this. The cops will find you and you will rot in jail," I screamed. The man then looked at me with an expressionless face and started to laugh all of a sudden. Then he said, "It's not the first time I'm doing this, you know?" I started to breathe heavily. I understood this guy is a serial killer. He came closer to me, lifted me from the floor, and then faced me towards the poor guy and said, "Tell me, do you like gory movies?" And he took out a gun from his pocket. He slowly walked toward the unconscious man on the chair and stood behind him, looking directly at me. I started to cry with terror. Why? Why are you doing this? Please let us go. What have we done?" The man screamed like crazy and said, "Be quiet. You are interrupting me with your bullshit now. You won't realize how much fun it is until you do it." Then he lifted his hand and placed the gun behind the man's head. The man got back to his senses and said in a dizzy voice, "What's happening? What is this?" I screamed at the top of my lungs, "No, please don't." At that moment, a loud gunshot took place, almost making my ears numb. That psycho shot that poor salesman from point-blank range. His blood splattered on my face, and I screamed one last time. My voice got choked, and I sat there silently sobbing. My entire life flashed in front of my eyes while the psycho started to walk towards me. I knew my end was near, and probably like his other victims, no one will know about me and that poor Ikea salesman. He then comes close to me and whispered in my ear, "Don't suffer so much. I hate when they suffer like this. It will only take a second. Now close your eyes, doll." I closed my eyes as tears rolled down my cheeks. I could hear my breath as I waited for death. The man placed the warm gun on my forehead, burning my skin a bit, but I didn't feel that pain anymore. I heard the trigger being pulled back one more time. Then the man said for the last and final time, "Ready or not, here it comes." When I opened my eyes, I saw cops running around me and the psycho lying on the floor coughing blood. His eyes looked at me, and then he never blinked. It's been 5 days since I was released from the hospital. The man at the counter was about to close the store when he realized he saw a girl entering the unit but never saw her leaving the place. So he decided to check the footage just when he found me standing near the mattress area talking to a guy and then following him to the other side of the store. He recognizes that the guy is not their salesman. Moreover, he's an infamous serial killer that the cops were looking for. He rushed there and found the basement door locked. He called the cops immediately and also heard the first gunshot. I was lucky enough that the cops reached me as soon as they did and saved me from this devil before he shot me, just like the poor salesman. I might have to undergo therapy. I'm now boarding a flight to San Francisco to stay with my parents. I don't know when I'll be able to move out again and live on my own. I'm 20 years old and I work at my town's Ikea. Since I went to school during the daytime, my boss put me on an overnight shift after the store closes at 11 p.m. This means I was working from 11 to roughly about 1 a.m. I was basically a janitor going around the store, mopping the floor, cleaning and tidying whatever people touched or sat around in the furniture. Given that Ikea was a supercenter, there would still be some employees working after hours, but for some reason that night I was one of only 2 other people going around the store to clean. It was around midnight and I was dusting off some of the shelves in one of the concept living rooms when I heard someone's footsteps echoing in the distance behind me. This was odd, as the store was closed over an hour ago and no one was supposed to be on the store's premises. I brushed it off as it was probably my coworker Carlos going around and doing his part, though it would be so unusual for him to do that given that we basically never see each other while we're cleaning because the store is so big and we were assigned to clean our areas of the store each time. I brushed it off, and after some time passed, I eventually made my way to the children's bed section of the store. It wasn't my favorite part of the store because it always was badly lit by the broken lamps overhead. I was making the beds when I noticed movements in the far corners of my vision. It was faint, like something ducking under one of the beds. I started to get pretty anxious by this point because I had just remembered the footsteps from earlier and connected the dots. Something was definitely off, and I realized that there's a high chance I'm not alone in this part of the store. I looked around, but obviously nothing. As much as I had my suspicions, I started to wonder if my mind just made up what I saw. A couple of minutes passed, and I was still very much on guard. That's when I heard a plastic cup hit the floor about a block away. It came from one of the kitchen rooms in the kitchen section, which was the last section I had to clean before I was done for the night. I stopped what I was doing and looked in the direction of the sound. All I saw was a cup in the middle of the alleyway. That made it real. My fight or flight instinct started kicking in pretty intensely at this point as I tried to make sense of what was going on. I started to think someone was messing with me. Either my coworker or some random kids were playing some sort of prank to scare me. However, my coworker Carlos isn't the type to joke around and we barely talk. Either way, I figured whoever was doing this was trying to lure me in towards the cup. I decided to call Carlos's name, but I got no reply. I told him if it was a prank, he should stop it right now. At this moment, I was almost particularly sure it was a joke and walked toward the cup to pick it up. Once I was there, I noticed that one of the cupboards underneath the sink from the concept kitchen was slightly left open. My imagination was running wild at this point, so I slowly walked toward the cupboard and opened it completely to see if anyone was inside. That's when I saw a sickly-looking man staring right at me. I immediately backed off a couple of feet away, and he was still staring right at me with these creepy white eyes and a sickly smile. He wasn't saying anything, just making very creepy eye contact with me, which was probably the scariest part. After about 5 long, traumatizing seconds of this, I was creeped out enough that I ran to the nearest exit as fast as I could and headed home. I tried my best to forget about what just happened and ran to the nearest exit as fast as I could, leaving all my cleaning equipment behind. I went home and tried my best to forget about what had just happened, but I couldn't get the image of this creepy face out of my head. The next day, I called my boss to tell him what happened last night, and he was obviously taken aback and told me he was going to check the area for signs of someone. He called me back later in the day to tell me that they found crumbs of chips and cinnamon roll boxes in that cupboard, but nothing else. Ever since I've kept working there, and we never again found traces of anyone living in the store, even though I'm over it now and come to realize it was probably a homeless man. I still can't get that haunting image of his creepy face out of my head, nor can I make sense of that cup falling over for no reason. These are 2 stories from one situation that happened to me visiting Ikea. The first story happened to me when I was 6 years old at an Ikea store in Ohio. I was 1 aisle away from my mother. We were searching for furniture for our home when someone walked up and took my hand. I assumed it was my mother and just started walking without looking up because I was still too busy checking out the kids section. Halfway up the store, when I realized that we were headed to the doors and not checking out, I glanced up and saw the person holding my hand was a middle-aged man with dark hair and a leather jacket. Certainly not my mother. He grinned at me and tried to keep walking, but I immediately froze on the spot and dropped my hand. I looked back at where I lost my mother and started walking in that direction while crying. Once I made it back to my mother, my memory became a lot more of a blur. But the next day, I remember being in the car with my mother while she sobbed on the phone with the police. She had a car phone back then. They never caught the guy though, so no charges were ever pressed. It's scary to think that that could have been the end of my life if I hadn't glanced up when I did. She never let me out of her sight in public again. Fast forward to when I was now 20 years old. It was late afternoon in a relatively busy Ikea store. I was happy to find a parking spot not too far away from the entrance. I just finished buying some toilet and kitchen equipment, and as soon as I walked out of the store, I saw this man just standing around where my car was parked. I had to pass him to get to my car. I immediately felt something in my stomach that triggered me to walk in the opposite way. So I changed my course on the dime and just tried to make my way to the parking lot from a different direction. As soon as I crossed the street, the man started walking in my direction. Right away, my alarms are going off. I quickly picked up the pace, and so did he. At that point, my heart starts racing, and I pick up the pace even more. I keep looking back to make sure he knows that I see him. He's about less than 10 feet behind me and closing in. So when I look behind me, I notice that he's trying to look not suspicious by looking in the other direction. At that point, I quickly made a right into a space between 2 cars and thankfully lost his line of sight. I hid between 2 cars and watched him look around for me. I'm not far away from my car, and at this point I position myself so that I am now behind him and he's far in front of me, still looking around for me. I got safely into my car and drove out of the parking lot, never taking my eyes off the man who just sat at the end of the curb as I drove away. Be safe out there, everyone, and always be aware of your surroundings.